Welcome. Welcome to the Choices and Challenges panel discussion, What is Good Food? My name is Barbara Beckett, and I'm going to serve as the moderator today. And as we begin, I'd first like to thank Virginia Tech sponsors for supporting this event. They include the Department of Science and Technology and Society, the Department of Religion and Culture, the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, the Office of the President, and the Office of the Provost. Please take a moment in thanking our sponsors. During these next 2 hours, we have a wonderful opportunity, along with our 5 expert panelists, to, let me introduce them. Karen Karp, Julie Guthman, Fred Kirschenmann, Danielle Nierenberg, and Rachel Sherman, to delve into this question, what is good food? Starting with Karen, would you each please take a moment to introduce yourselves and give us a short biography about how you came to be so interested in this question of food?
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Karen Karp, and I am the president and founder of a consulting business in New York City called Karp Resources. We work with government organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and foundations to help them identify, launch, execute, and evaluate new ideas, concepts, and policies around good food. I came to food through an art background first, but my family history is rooted in agriculture support services out on the east end of Long Island, where I spend as much time as I possibly can. So I grew up in the 60s as Long Island was changing from a half suburban, half rural place to a mostly suburban, hardly rural place. But then as the late 70s came on, there was a movement to sort of save agriculture on the east end of Long Island. And I was very lucky that my father was involved in that, and so that's kind of how I had the food bug in my background. I went to college in New York City, worked in restaurants, and over the course of the last 25 years have been combining ways to integrate the supply side and the consuming side of food businesses to work better together for a more cohesive food system. And I raise oysters on the North Fork of Long Island.
Hi there, thank you for coming and thank you for organizing this. I'm Julie Guthman. I'm an associate professor of community studies, I'll explain that in a second, at UC Santa Cruz. How I got into good food is a long, circuitous story, and I'm not going to give you the details. My father was a health food nut way back when in the 60s and 70s, and I had to grow up on really horrid whole wheat, honey, carob chip cookies. It actually made me reject good food, and you know, I was fascinated by Wonder Bread and all the other things that my friends got to eat. So long story short, I grew up, when I was an adult, I've been in California in the 1980s, and I saw this tremendous rise in you know, these upscale restaurants, and everybody was serving this beautiful salad mix on their plates, and I got very fascinated by salad mix, which at the time was selling for about $15 a pound in supermarkets in my area. And it was really in the course, I had gone back to graduate school to get a PhD in geography at UC Berkeley. And in one class, we were asked to follow some sort of world commodity. And I said, and we had to do this in a group study. And I said, well, what about salad? What about organic salad mix? What's that about? Who's growing it? How are they growing it? Is it different than the way salad is being grown elsewhere? And so our professor was very interested in that topic. And we ended up doing a short research project where we interviewed all sorts of farmers in California, or not a lot of, we interviewed a few farmers, a few organic certifiers, a few distributors, and learned a tremendous amount about the way that salad mix was being grown in California, which in some ways wasn't that different than the rest of industrial agriculture in California. That later became my dissertation topic, and I ended up interviewing 150 growers in California who had been converting or had converted or always were organic producers, and learned a lot about organic production. And that became a book called Agrarian Dreams, The Paradox of Organic Farming in California. Since I finished my dissertation and got my degree, I've been at community studies. I promise to make this short. which is a very unique major where students do 6-month full-time field studies with social justice and social change organizations, and all of my students, or almost all of them, work on food and agriculture organizations. And so I've learned a tremendous amount over the last 9 years of watching 9 cohorts go through and go very invested in changing what people eat, how they eat, how food is produced, how it's traded. And I've learned a lot from watching them and listening to them. And so a lot of the insights I bring today are based on what I've learned from watching my students and listening to my students, and also as the basis of my new book that's, you can get a flyer out on the table, called, I might as well promote it, Weighing In Obesity, Food Justice, and the Limits of Capitalism. I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, thank you all for coming out. My name's Fred Kirschenmann, and I have to say I've never planned anything that I've done in my life. It's always responding to stuff that comes up. And it's been a fascinating journey. I, of course, grew up on our family farm in North Dakota and went off to college and graduate school and started a career in higher education, which I thought I would do the rest of my life. But it was a student, actually, during that time that introduced me to organic agriculture, and it was a fascinating idea. And so in 1976, I left the academic world and went back to manage our family farm in North Dakota and convert it to an organic operation. And thought I would do that the rest of my life, but got pulled into the whole sustainable agriculture movement, and then as a result of that, was invited back into the academic world in 2000 to become the director of the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State University. And then I thought, but I didn't want to give up the family farm, but we had a young family that had joined us, and they agreed to do the day-to-day operations. So in my spare time, I still manage the farm, but we have this wonderful young family who do the day-to-day operations. And we talk by cell phone a couple times a day, so I always tell people I just manage it by cell phone now. And then more recently, I was invited to become the president of the board of the Center for the Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture in New York. And so now I have this incredible opportunity to be involved in the heart of commodity agriculture in Iowa and this emerging urban agriculture in New York. And if I were to plan my career at this point in my life, I couldn't come up with anything better.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me thank the organizers of this event. It's a real pleasure and a real honor for me to be on this panel with these amazing panelists. And many thanks to all of you for coming out this morning and sharing your day with us. Again, my name is Danielle Nierenberg. I am the director of a project called Nourishing the Planet at the World Watch Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C. I've spent most of the last 2 years traveling in Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. I visited about 30 countries over those last 2 years, talking to hundreds of farmers and farmers groups and scientists and researchers and academics and journalists, and really just listening to them and getting their thoughts about what's working to help alleviate hunger and poverty while also protecting the environment. How did I get into this place? I think the real way that I came to be involved in both agriculture and the environment was when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic. And I don't think, even though I grew up in a farming community, I don't think until then I really understood the connections between agriculture and the environment. So that led me to get a graduate degree in agriculture, food, and environment at Tufts. And then I was just telling Rachel that I interned at the World Watch Institute and then made them hire me. So that's how I got to where I am today, and I'll stop there.
I'm Rachel Sherman. I teach at the University of Minnesota in the Departments of Sociology and Global Studies. It's hard to make a long story short. I'll try. One of my first exposures to this food issue, the question of food, had to do with, I worked at a group called Food First, or the Institute for Food and Development Policy in San Francisco in the mid-1980s. Some of your parents will know Francis Moore LePay and Joe Collins, who started that organization. And we worked on a few books, one of which was called World Hunger, 12 Myths, and I got really interested in kind of world food issues. I went back to graduate school at Wisconsin and ended up spending a few years in Chile writing my dissertation. I was studying Chile's agro-export oriented growth. As many of you know, you're eating Chilean food whenever you're eating fruits in the wintertime or salmon almost any time. Most of it comes from Chile. So I looked at the transformation of that landscape and economy to become a food producer for many people in the north, and got interested in that whole process. The reason I'm actually here, though, is because my last project was on the global struggle over agricultural biotechnology, and I wrote a book, which I forgot to bring, called Fighting for the Future of Food. And I studied the struggle between agribusiness and anti-biotech activists around this technology, and got increasingly convinced as I studied activists that there was a tremendous impact on the trajectory of this technology, the way we think about it, how much we know about it, what we think about it, how it's accepted or rejected in many parts of the world. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. To let you know what the format is today, we're going to have the panel discussing a variety of questions for about 90 minutes, and then we will save about 30 minutes at the end for question and answers. So when we get to that stage, I will invite folks to line up behind the microphone here and ask your questions to the panel. As we get started, I'd like to suggest a frame for today's topic, because it's pretty clear that what is good food is kind of a large topic. So as I thought about this, it occurred to me that what is good food really depends on the perspective that you're looking at the question. So in many cases, it's sort of like it's what hat you're wearing when you're asking the question. So to ask that question, I brought along a few props. I'm going to start here with my personal hat. Anybody who knows me knows that they've seen me in this cap on campus. I've had it in my possession for 20 years. It's totally threadbare, and I really love it. And I'm really comfy when I have it on. So when I put on my personal hat and I ask the question, what is good food? I'm concerned about what foods are good for my body. I'm concerned about what foods are good for my kids. And I'm concerned about what foods are good for my aging parents. I worry about nutrition. I worry about contaminants. I worry about convenience. And I worry about price. I like food that tastes good. I'm sure most of us do. I try to buy fresh, but with my schedule, putting a meal on the table every night gets pretty tough. From my perspective, the perspective of my personal hat, I keep asking, shouldn't good food be good to eat, good for the body? Shouldn't it be a little bit convenient? And shouldn't it be good for the pocketbook? But then, if I take off my personal hat and I put on my community hat, this is sort of a blend between the agricultural sector and the city sector. I'm concerned about where I live and the livelihood of the community that supports us. We're fortunate here in Blacksburg to live at a place where we have a very healthy agricultural sector and we have a very healthy farmers market. Most of us know that our food doesn't just come from the grocery store. So given that perspective, shouldn't good food be good for our community's economic vitality? Shouldn't it be good for social welfare? Shouldn't it be good for the local ecosystems? Shouldn't it contribute to all that? Now with that train of thought, there's no reason why I shouldn't scale it up. This is my sophisticated hat, I think. Thank you. So I'm putting on my national and global hat now. And I'm going to begin to wonder whether food shouldn't be good for national and global economic vitality. Shouldn't it be good for social welfare and social justice across the planet? Shouldn't it be good for the impact that it has on communities that are quite distant from ours? Shouldn't good food be good for all people on the planet? Well, why stop here? Now I'm going to put on my planetary hat. Here we have a renewable resource made from paper, local artisan hat. And now with this hat on, I'm going to wonder about the impact of my food choices on the planet. How are we going to share the air, the water, the soil, with all of the rest of Earth's inhabitants? How are we going to share it in a way that's a win-win for everyone? Shouldn't good food be good for the entire planet? So now I'm going to try to wear all of these hats at once, and when I try to put them all on, I'm asking the question, what on earth do I have for dinner? It's hard to wear all these hats at once. Looks pretty stupid. So when we try to put all the hats on at once and we go to the grocery store, we always tend to fall back to easy answers. This food is bad, that food is good. Of course, life isn't like that. It's much more complex, and our panelists today will help us wade through some of the food complexity wearing all these different hats. So to get started, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to put on their personal hat. Here we go. And ask you, maybe starting with Karen again, what you choose for dinner and why?
It's tough going first. I hope you started the other end of the table with some of the questions. You know, the word dilemma has been associated with food now for a while, with the publication of a book with that word in it. And even before there was the book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, personally, I think dinner is a minor dilemma for everybody all the time. My personal dilemmas around dinner are, am I working 11 or 12 hours today? Do I want to make something for myself to eat? Does my partner want to go out to eat? How many times have we done either one this week? So balancing all sorts of, I'm a Libra, so balancing all sorts of things about how many times have I done this week versus done that this week, and why can't I cook more? I know that that's better, but actually I'm really tired and I want somebody to serve me. And then there is the whole value proposition around what it is we're actually eating. And I would say this is not specifically the right answer to that question, but it is a good anecdote to it, which is that a month ago, I moved my office from a place where we were sharing space with a catering company that fed us every day for lunch for free. My staff got a free lunch every day, and after 4.5 years of being there, we hated it. We just hated everything about being given this lunch every day. And we moved to an office where I built a kitchen, and now we have shared communal meals when they happen. Sometimes they're planned, sometimes they're not. So for me, the decision to actually anchor the ability to prepare food for myself and my staff and have them prepare it for each other when I'm not there or when they want to, and to invite people in, has been the core of my new approach to food, to integrate it more into my workday in a holistic way rather than separating what I do at work and the issues around work, to try to balance with the issues or the inability to be at home and do what I think is right. So I'm experimenting with integrating work and life around food a little bit more as my new definition of good.
This is a very ironic question for me to answer, because I will spend a whole term with my students and not ever tell them about what I eat, and it invokes all this curiosity, and the question I always get at the end of the quarter is, what's in your refrigerator? And because one of the things I really want to impart to my students is that consumption choices are not the primary way by which we should be changing the food system. Having said that, I'm pretty much a food fascist. I shop at the farmer's market twice a week. I buy only local, seasonal, organic food. I cook it from scratch. And sometimes I say to my partner, can't we just go out and get a burrito? This is so difficult. But you know, I live at the center of coastal foodieism in Northern California, and that's what I do. And the reason I do it is because I do find it delicious, I find it beautiful, and the more I've learned about industrial food, the more I'm just disgusted by it. So.
Well, I don't know quite how to address this, because I'm privileged to be in a sort of unique situation. Our beef comes from our own farm, so you know, we have our own animal butchered and put our beef in the freezer, and that's the primary source of our meat for our diet. We belong to 2 CSAs in Iowa, both farmers that I know real well have become good friends of mine. They grow incredible food, and so and we have one of the nice things about the relationship that we have is it had not occurred to them that they could do winter shares, which then provides us with food that we can can and freeze, and so we really be able to eat from their farm year-round instead of just during the growing season. So that's worked out really well. So, you know, virtually, and we don't eat any processed food. We just have taken that off the plate because, you know, partly because of taste, plus because of these other values that we have. But we also recognize that, you know, there are some other things that we just like. I like ice cream, for example, and we haven't figured out yet how to make that. We do make our own flour because we have, our own wheat from our own farm. So, you know, we go to the supermarket to buy some Ben & Jerry's ice cream and you know, orange juice and a few other things like that that we like. So that's basically what good food is for us. What that does for the planet, I'm not sure yet.
It's a really interesting question, and I think for me at least, and I think for most of us, food is both a very private issue and it's a very public issue, and I think my own personal choices have sort of reflected that. I grew up in a very small town in Missouri called Defiance, and at that time it was a community made of about 300 people. My folks were the only city people who moved there. The rest of the people who lived there were corn and soybean farmers and livestock farmers, and you know, I ate meat every day as a kid and enjoyed it, and then when I was 13, I read Frances Moore Lapé's book, Diet for a Small Planet, which was a huge eye-opener for me. And really from that time on, I've been a vegetarian, and that decision to stop eating meat sort of led me, again, to where I am today. I became very interested in the food system, and where food was produced, how it was produced, who was producing it. I studied agriculture and the environment in both undergrad and graduate school. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I worked with farmers. And you know, the last 2 years, I've been on a listening tour to those 30 countries that I mentioned before, really just gathering people's thoughts on what they're eating every day, what they want the food system to look like. And so one of the biggest sort of things that's happened to me over the last 10 years is that and this is surprising for people when they hear that I'm a vegetarian, I became very interested in industrial animal production or factory farming. And I've visited feedlots and confinement facilities for chickens and pigs really all over the world. I did a big sort of investigative tour in Asia a few years ago, looking at how industrial meat is produced. And really the ingredients that go into it are not fun. You know, the modern meat, the recipe for it requires lots of fossil fuel intensive feed and fertilizer and pesticides. The things that come out of factory farms are equally unsavory, including massive amounts of manure that can't be taken up by land that's near it, antibiotic resistance because we pump these animals full of antibiotics and other inputs. And so for me, and I've, you know, over the last 20 or more years, I've tried hard not to be that preachy vegetarian, but I think that there's a real market and an environment where people can grow and raise meat in very sustainable ways, whether it's in North Dakota or Malawi. And I'm a big advocate for small-scale animal agriculture because it really allows all of us to really put a face, not just to the animals that we're eating, but to the people who are raising it. And for me, that's what good food is, really putting that human face to everything that we're eating.
In terms of what I eat, what do I think is good food? Well, our household is pretty schizophrenic. I have 2 tweens, and so my husband and I eat pretty healthily, and one of us, usually me, has the energy to cook. My kids couldn't be more in love with Doritos, Fritos, Lay's, with us. And I'm sure it's a form of rebellion against what I encourage them to eat. Or I've sort of given it up as a battle. So we have a bifurcated food system in the household, hoping they'll come around the way I did. You know, when you first asked about how we came to food, I didn't want to go through the whole story, but my neighbors in the 1960s were probably the first hippies in Rhode Island who started the food co-op, and I would go there and hang out with my friends every day and eat popcorn with, what do we put on it, brewers. It is one way to ruin a good bowl of popcorn. And so I ate very healthy food. I became a macrobiotic at 15 for about 3 months. And so I'm just trying to let my kids find their own way, but I guess I try to personally buy as much fresh food and whole food as I can, partly because I want to support that part of the food sector, but also because I just think it's healthy, but it is a tremendous amount of labor. And I think for us to forget the labor intensivity of food preparation. I mean, yes, it can be a joy, but it's not such a joy when you're, you know, a poor single mother or whatever. Not my particular case, but I think we also have to think about all those prescriptions about eating healthily and whose shoulders those burdens tend to fall on. So I too try not to be preachy about food, and the one thing I do preach to my kids is if it costs 99 cents, don't eat it.
Great, thank you. I think one theme that we're hearing that comes out of what everybody has said here is that there are concerns about not only nutritional differences, but contaminant differences and health to the planet differences, social welfare differences, and all of these. But focusing more on the nutritional differences and looking at organic and conventional and every combination therein. Are there really nutritional differences? Are there really significant contaminant differences between these two types of foods or multiple types of foods? Fred, do you want to maybe weigh in on that one?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and the answers are probably not as simple as we're sometimes led to believe. I think that it's pretty clear from the data that when you look at the data in terms of the overall categories, and there have been some studies done by the National Health Perspectives, for example, where they tested the urine of children from families that were buying mostly organic food compared with the urine of children that were buying mostly conventional food. And the difference of, what most of us would call toxic chemicals in the urine of these children was really quite different, was really quite significant. But when you look at, the studies overall, the nutritional difference, the organic tends to be somewhat higher, but it's not significantly higher. And I think as a farmer, the reason for that is because, not all organic food is the same. I can be a certified organic farmer and not do anything about the biological health of my soil or some of those other factors which contribute to the nutritional health of food. All I need to do is to make sure I use natural inputs instead of synthetic inputs, and so you shouldn't expect a lot of difference in terms of the nutritional quality of the food. So when you do the study and you don't isolate food that's grown organically in a particular way that pays attention to the biological health of soil, et cetera, which is what increases the nutrient value, then of course you're not going to see a lot of difference. So I think we haven't done the research yet for at least what I would like to see us move in the direction of food, and we'll talk about that some more later, I'm sure, which then contributes to the health and the benefits of food. And we haven't really done a lot of studies around this. Now, the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, particularly in the Center for a Livable Future, they are now in the process of initiating some of that research where you're really looking at what are the health benefits, and not only nutrition, but other health benefits from food grown in a particular way that really pays attention to the biological health of soil, which is the ultimate foundation. Sir Albert Howard wrote about this in the 1940s in his book Soil and Health, but we haven't really done any peer-reviewed research to demonstrate whether he was right or wrong about that, and he did that on the basis of observation. So this is still a research agenda that we need to look at. So I think the answer is, generally, I think overall you're going to find the data shows that organic food tends to be nutritionally better and somewhat lower in the kind of contaminants that we don't want in our food. But it's not a huge the difference is not as great as potentially it can be.
I'll jump in on that. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that's really interesting is at the same time that organic agriculture has grown tremendously in California. I don't have the latest statistics. Everybody says it grows 20% a year, but I've heard that statistic for about 20 years. So I don't know, but it's a good chunk of crop production right now. I would guess around 5-10%. But at the same time that organic has grown, there's more pesticide use in California than ever before. And one of the things of having this kind of food that's separated out is growers that, for whatever reason, decide not to come under organic production use chemicals with impunity. I think that organics generally have less toxins on them, but that's a tricky thing because we're talking about pesticide residues, and some pesticides do not really stay on the food, but they're still in the air. And so when we talk about what's good for us, in terms of are we getting exposed to pesticides, we're forgetting about all the people who produce food and the many farm workers who are exposed to intense pesticide regimes on a daily basis. They're the ones that are really suffering from conventional agriculture much more than the everyday consumer who may or may not get some residues on their fruit or vegetable.
There's also a question now about concerns about genetically modified foods. It isn't just the organic versus conventional, but in the pesticide piece. But is there any concerns about eating GM foods, and if so, which ones?
I have to respond, Rachel. I think most of the research that's been done suggests that there's not probably a health concern about genetically modified food. However, I think there are a lot of other concerns that we might want to think about when we think about agricultural biotechnology having to do, and this has really been some of the core issues driving the anti-biotech activism, which has to do with corporate control of agriculture, the patenting of life forms, and sort of the breeding tools and technologies. I mean, the development of genetic modification techniques and technologies has been associated really with the privatization of science and the patenting of all the products that are produced by firms. And I think that's really a bigger, much bigger concern in terms of the future of the food system, food democracy, food justice, farmer autonomy, farmers in the global south. All those issues I think are probably more important than what is this particular genetically modified corn going to do to me. That said, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I suggest that people look at the scientific literature if they're interested in that particular question.
So it sounds like most of you are concerned about the contaminant piece, the social justice piece around conventional foods, and are tending toward the organic end of things. But organic can cost more. So let's say you can only afford it to buy a few foods. How would you balance this? Julie, do you want to work with that?
Yeah, I want to. Maybe we'll get to the question of cost in a bit. But if you had to choose a couple things you could buy organically, I would choose organic strawberries. Or conventional strawberries have a very intense pesticide regime that includes known carcinogens and methyl bromide is a soil fumigant that's been used in strawberry production for quite a long time. It's being phased out because of it depletes the ozone layer, but now they're replacing it with methyl iodide, which is far more toxic and is causing birth defects among farm worker children. So strawberries is by far the most toxic thing, although there's plenty others. The other thing I think I'm particularly careful about is conventional beef. And Danielle already mentioned some of the issues with conventional beef. The other part of it is the hormones that go in conventional beef. They're analogs of synthetic estrogen that was used for women in the 50s and 60s to prevent miscarriage and to promote lactation, and it turned out to cause all sorts of reproductive cancers and infertility among their progeny. We're using these analogs of these same things in beef cattle. Now it's showing that these analogs are causing obesity, irrespective of what people are eating. So the beef hormones, and they're tremendously understudied, and I imagine that that's because of the strength of the beef lobby. So I would look very careful. If I were to eliminate one conventional food from the diet, it would be conventionally grown beef, and look at grass-fed and natural alternatives if you can get that guarantee.
Well, I think that the cost of food thing is something we really need to unpack more because, we claim that we have the cheapest food in the world because we spend less of our average disposable income on food than any other country in the world. But that's a false statistic because our average disposable income is also so much higher. And I made that point with Chuck Benbrook a few years ago, and he said, yeah, that's right. He said, that's really the wrong metric, and we come up with a different one. So what he did a quick study of the cost of food in the United States compared to other countries based on the cost per calorie. And what he found was that we're 23rd on the list. There are 22 countries that have cheaper food than we do and based on the cost per calorie. And so I said, but Chuck, that's still the wrong metric because you can have food that's very high in calories but low in nutrient value, so you're still not getting a good deal if you're buying cheap food on that basis. And he said, yeah, he said, but that's a more complex issue. So, but the point here is that, and again, there have been some anecdotal kinds of, a lot of anecdotal information around this that would indicate that, if you're buying, and well, let me just give you a story. And the person that really helped me understand this was LaDonna Redmond, who is a black activist woman in Chicago and a Kellogg Fellow. And she has made arrangements for organic farmers to bring food into her resource-poor community where people don't have the money to buy, normally buy organic food. And she's been doing workshops around the country about this. And I attended one of her workshops once, and I went up to her afterwards and I said, so how can you do this, because organic food is so much more expensive? And she said, look, with her finger stuck out at me, she said, you don't understand. She said that the people in my community don't have access to a supermarket because they're in what we call a food desert. And most of them don't have cars and there isn't any public transportation, so they can't get the 4 miles to the closest supermarket to buy conventional fruits and vegetables, let alone organic, because that's the kind of food that they need for their diet. And so she said they are forced to buy their food in liquor stores and convenience stores in our community because they're the only enterprises that settle in our community. And that, she said, is almost all highly processed food, which has almost no nutrient value, and that, she said, is damned expensive food. I said, okay, I get it. and this is really the thing. And there, again, there's been some anecdotal evidence, when people buy really high nutrient value, whether it's organic or conventional, but high nutrient value food like fruits and vegetables, they end up eating less. So they may pay more per ounce, but they actually end up in the period of over a month spending less food than when they buy the, quote, cheaper food in a supermarket. So we really have to unpack this and empower people to buy the food that they really need, that's good for them, that enables them to eat food that's satisfying and that doesn't, that has potentially health benefits. One of the other things as our average the percentage of food that we spend of our average disposable income, which is now a little below 10%, and that's gone down from about 20% back in the 1960s. But in the 1960s, we were only spending about 8% of our disposable income on health, and we're now spending 16%. And again, an interesting question is what's the relationship between that change in those two statistics? So there are a lot of things about, in other words, the cheap food. My point is the cheap food that we currently have could in fact be extremely expensive when we really unpack it all.
Sure, this is a good lead-in to talk about a project that we are very involved with in New York City called the New York City Green Cart Initiative. I left a couple pieces of literature on the table out front about it. And from my perspective, the problem of labeling something creates a potentially oversimplistic decision-making process about how you're going to choose your food. And just for the record, I'm not an organic food enthusiast necessarily. I don't prioritize personally organic. But so I'll tell you a little bit about this program. The New York City Department of Health created 1,000 new street cart permits in New York City in 2008 exclusively for the sale of fresh fruits and vegetables in low-income communities. And it was a very, very, very big deal because there's a very vibrant street vending culture in New York City, and there are only 3,000 permits in the traditional system, and advocates have been wanting to get more permits into that system. But because we have these great disparities of food access and health and the food desert issue and all of the above, and a growing population of people who have less and less money to spend on food but have the greatest need to buy healthier food, the New York City Department of Health has 4 initiatives to deal with this issue, and the Green Carts is one of them. And part of the funding, which comes from a private foundation, was because everybody knew that these vendors were going to need some support to have small businesses in communities where traditionally for the last 35 years there has not been retail selling fruits and vegetables in these communities. Supermarkets left these communities in the 70s, and they're just starting to come back. We work with the city on a contract to give technical support to the vendors. So our job is to ensure that these vendors are running successful businesses selling fruits and vegetables. Our only metric about the increased consumption of fruits and vegetables in this community, our metric is, are our vendors able to make a living selling fruits and vegetables in these communities? If they are, that means that more people are consuming much more fruits and vegetables. A couple of things, once we got this project, we got all sorts of advocacy groups calling our office saying, you got to have organic food on the carts. You got to have local food on the carts. We want you to mandate that 20% of all the food on the carts is local food. And first of all, we don't mandate anything because the vendors are all independent entrepreneurs running their own businesses. They make their own choices. We give them resources to try to make the best choices. And it was really, really, really interesting because layered on top of this sort of diet-related illness crisis that we have are all of these different perspectives from advocates about, but organic food is really what low-income people need. I'm thinking, really? I think low-income people just need food. And then the local food, we'll mandate local food on these carts. Well, that's really interesting because maybe 3 months out of the year, maybe 20% of the food on the carts could be local. And so the whole point is to have a range of products on these carts that are palatable to the customers and engaging these customers in purchasing the fruits and vegetables. Now, the range of sales from these carts is $200 to $2,000 a day. Some of our vendors are selling $2,000 a day of fruits and vegetables. That's like 20 cases, 15 to 20 cases of fruits and vegetables off of a 6x3 push cart in New York City. The fascinating thing is that when we were able to trial wireless EBT, so people who have SNAP benefits can buy products from our carts with their SNAP benefits, we saw an incredible sharp increase in the sale of fruits and vegetables off these carts. Some of our vendors are selling $10,000 a month through their wireless EBT machines. So what that means is that when people get their benefits, they're coming to these carts, and some of them are buying $100, $150 worth of fruits and vegetables. So for these people, what we're seeing is the first step of a curve of being able to have access and make decisions about their fruits and vegetables. And now some of these customers are coming to our vendors and saying, you know, I heard organic food is good. What can you tell me about them? So we're really kind of on the front line in a very early stage education process with exactly the groups of people we are talking about that need to have better choices and more nutritious choices.
I love that idea. There's somebody out there who wants to get some carts on campus. You know, we could really use it. But I'm going to switch hats here because that really is a good segue into thinking about the community. And so we'll head on to the local, you know, the food, what is good food from the perspective of the local community. So, you know, as you were talking, I was wondering about this. This really starts to answer the question, does buying locally provide a realistic future for food production? It does provide, you know, regional economies for small farmers and so on. Karen and Julie, if you wouldn't mind kind of continuing with it, because you both framed that really well.
Yeah, well, let me roll in what I forgot to say into that question. The thing about organic food and why it costs more, and I will answer the question, it's designed to cost more. Organic is a system of production. It's a regulated system of production. It was designed to protect farmers who want to grow organically. And so it's a voluntary form of regulation. So if you want to get the benefits of the organic label, you have to get certified, and then you would get the benefits of the organic label is you get a price incentive as long as there's not too much competition in the organic markets. And so I keep on forgetting what I wanted to say before that. That's why I'm getting screwed up here. Because what I want to say is in terms of production costs, organic food is not necessarily more expensive to grow. Some crops are much more difficult to grow organically, and some are not. And when I did my research, I learned that some growers were growing more cheaply organically. So the cost of organic food often has little to do with what production costs are and has to do with what farmers and retailers can set in the market. But they are growing organically because they want to get a higher price. Same with local. The reason local emerged as a solution to the food system in part because people were disappointed with organics in terms of its social justice concerns. And so when organics became heavily industrialized, when you had very big corporations getting involved, particularly in the distribution of organics, a local food movement emerged to support growers who've been really left out, who felt that organic was going to be their solution and indeed weren't. And so, you know, when you have produce from California coming to upstate New York, and really hurting the upstate New York producers, that's kind of one of the things that led local to emerge. I like local food because it's fresher and tastier, but I don't think localism as an ideology really has much to do with how we should change the food system. Our food system needs to be changed with policies, and let's face it, some locals are a lot better off than others. I live in the central coast of California, and I'm always blown away when my students said, I did the locavore challenge. I ate only from the local food system in California in August. And it's like, how tough can that be when there's about 300 crops grown in a 10 square mile road radius, as long as you give up the coffee and bananas and chocolate? So
Tough though, that's tough.
So you know, it's great if you're, you know, we grow food year round in California, not so in Saskatchewan. So so local food it's become kind of a fetish. The main point is it's become kind of a fetish. It doesn't necessarily address what's wrong in the food system. If we're worried about not growing ecologically, or we're worrying about social justice, then we need to address those issues straight on. There's many local producers that are big or corporate, if that's your issue, or have terrible labor practices, or use every pesticide in the book. Let's not forget that Walmart is a local company somewhere. So I find localism to be a really distracting way to think about food system change, which is not the same as like, if you want food that's grown nearby because it's fresher and tastier, great.
So, but local food is a great way in. It's an excellent entry point for anybody who's curious about the food system. So this is one of the greatest things, in addition to all the opportunities that the local food movement, that the farmers market movement in this country, there now, I think we all remember there's something like 7,180 farmers markets in the United States right now, and a few years ago there were 3,500. So, I mean, there's a huge interest in local food, and that is not only great for consumers who want that, but it's also really good for farmers who can adjust and modify their production system to sell directly in that way. In our work, which is generally between bigger buyers, so institutions and regional farmers, or restaurant groups or retailers and regional farmers, chefs and agriculture, what we see is that what local food has done has created this real, genuine, passionate interest in food. The problem is if you stop asking your questions there. If you'd say, I buy local food and therefore everything I'm doing is right, or local is sustainable, it's a terrible analogy. Local is a very poor proxy for sustainable, but if local is what it took to get you to start asking questions about your food, what you need to do next as a responsible citizen or a responsible buyer or a responsible government or a responsible policymaker is say, what are the other questions I can start to ask? It's local, but how is it produced? It's local, but who's growing it? It's local, but how is it packaged? It's local, but how is it getting to the marketplace? So local's a great great entry point because people are really enthusiastic about it. But don't stop your inquiry there.
As a farmer, I need to make one small correction, Julie, to your
Correction or disagreement?
because as an organic farmer, I do have some extra costs. I have certification costs. You know, it costs my farm about $5,000 a year to get certified. That's an extra cost. And we do have extra marketing costs because I can't just take my grain to a local elevator and sell it. I have to negotiate a market for it, then I have to find a processing facility that's certified to process it, which sometimes I have to haul it 200 miles. So there are some extra costs.
No, I do realize there's extra costs in the certification, and that's one of the issues. Is the burden? That's the policy issue. There's the burdens on those who are doing right to meet those extra costs, as opposed to those who are doing wrong. But still, in terms of how it's marketed, it's far beyond your costs.
Can I jump in real quick? I think something Julie said a few minutes ago about organic farmers getting higher prices, and I think this is a really important and kind of tricky issue because on the one hand, I think it's really important for farmers to be paid higher prices. They are doing really important work. We need them, and there has to be a return for them to stay on the farm or go to the farm, or we won't have local farmers or organic farmers or any other farmers. So I think that price issue is important. At the same time, of course, we have to be concerned about who gets excluded when food prices go up, what impact that has on low-income families. So to me, this suggests what we really need to do is focus on questions of social inequality at a very broad scale. If we want to fix the food system, we've got to fix the degree of inequalities that we've got in the production of wealth and ownership in this country. Because once we don't have very many poor people, or we can reduce the number of people who can't afford the food, we don't have a price problem. Because for those of us who make enough money, we can afford to pay the farmer a higher price. That's not the case with low-income families. So I think we need to start thinking about kind of broader distributional issues when we think about the food system. And we often don't make those connections. We just kind of get stuck on what about me and how can I afford this? And
Danielle, I know you've worked with small farmers and addressed this question of does buying local provide a realistic future for them? Do you have some?
Sure, and I'm going to sort of tackle this from the international perspective for just a little bit. I'm going to give you some stats. 20 years ago, Africa received 4% of the food it consumed from imports. Today, that figure is 12%, so it's grown 3 times. This could partly be a result of rising incomes for middle-class people in sub-Saharan Africa, but from our analysis, putting our book together, we have also found that it's a result of worsening conditions for African farmers. If you walk into a grocery store in Abidjan or Dakar in Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire, you'll find very few products that are actually produced in those countries. What you'll find is rice that's grown in Thailand, and you'll find boxed milk that comes from Belgium or France, even though both those countries could produce more than enough rice or milk or dairy products to feed their consumers. And I talked about this issue with researchers at the Africa Rice Center, which is based in Senegal. And they're working with farmers to really help them make these local rice varieties more popular among consumers. And so most Senegalese tend to think that anything that comes from Senegal is bad. Like, we don't want that. We want the good stuff from France and so or Thailand or whatever. And so the researchers have found that if they work with the farmers to find ways to better process the rice, that essentially means just picking the rocks out of it or picking the crop debris out of it, and then labeling it in a way that shows that it's high quality rice and that it's grown locally, that they can sell it and get a reasonable price for it. Probably not as much as the imported rice, but a price that is a good price point for them that helps them pay their costs. And so this really sort of demonstrates for me that showing farmers changing how the farmers' practices and also educating consumers about food is an important way to encourage local buying. And in a similar project, I met with farmers who are part of the Self-Employed Women's Association in India. It's called SIWA, and SIWA is one of the largest unions in the world. It has more than 1 million members, and some of the women who belong to SIWA have developed really high-quality products, including rice, organic spices, dried fruits and vegetables, and they market them to poor communities. This is similar to what Fred was just talking about a few minutes ago. These are poor, underserved communities where the community members often have to buy food in smaller quantities. They can't buy a big bag of rice, but they can buy enough for day-to-day use. So SIWA is helping train what are essentially door-to-door saleswomen who go with rice and other foods to communities that are underserved and sell these folks the foods that they need that are higher quality than what they would normally be getting. And the final thing I just want to talk about briefly is that I think we really need to think about ways to help professionalize agriculture and make it something that youth want to get involved in. The age of farmers is increasing everywhere, whether it's in Iowa or Tanzania. Farmers are getting older and older, and that's for a lot of reasons. Youth don't think that they can make money from agriculture. They don't think it's an exciting career, and some of the innovations that I saw on the ground are really making agriculture cool again and making it something that kids want to get involved in. One of those that I'll just talk about briefly is a project in Uganda called Developing Innovations in School Cultivation. And that project works with about 20 schools in a village that is about an hour and a half outside of Kampala. And they're helping these schools not only have school gardens, but also teaching kids how to cook and process that food and then market it. So they can market it to stores in their community, and some of it's being sold under their own local label in Kampala. And really the most exciting part about this project for me is that they're reigniting a taste for indigenous vegetables in these communities again. These indigenous vegetables are often considered poor people's food or hunger foods or weeds. They're not something that people have continued eating, but they have a lot of nutritional benefits. They're also better adapted to really hot climates. They're resistant to disease. And so reincorporating these vegetables in diets and educating kids about how important they are, I think is another way to really involve youth. And again, I think this professionalizing of agriculture is something that not only works in sub-Saharan Africa, but it can work everywhere.
Well, out of that idea of ways in which you can begin to affect change on the food system, that sort of harkens back to, we've all heard we can vote with our wallets, but there's got to be more ways that we can become involved in changing the food system. I know, Rachel, you've got some ideas on that one, how we can actually make significant changes in our local community and how we do things, other than just voting with our wallets.
Yeah. Well, from this work I did on studying the anti-biotech movement, one of the things I basically start every talk on that topic with is something I observed, which was basically there are probably 400 or 500 people who've been involved, maybe 1,000 people around the world who've been involved with that movement, which is a very, very small number. And they have so profoundly shaped the thinking about this technology. They've had a major, major impact on the corporations that are involved. I would argue that they are part of the reason, not all of the reason, but part of the reason that companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and DuPont are now starting to, I'm not sure how to use this word, but donate certain of the proprietary rights that they have over their technologies now in particular projects. I don't know how those projects are working, and I would be careful about seeing this as a very positive trend without looking at it more seriously. But I do think that social movements and social activism around food issues has a tremendous effect. I mean, there's been a movement here in the U.S. to try to get livestock producers to stop using antibiotics just on a regular basis. I don't know how if all that practice has stopped, but I do think they've had quite a bit of an effect. Now we see labeling of RBGH milk in stores. I think that has a lot to do with activism actually in the 90s and early 2000s. So I do think getting involved in either groups or movements or actually taking some kinds of political action rather than just walking into a grocery or a co-op or Whole Foods if you can afford it, and voting with your dollars. I think those things are very important. It really doesn't take very many people to get businesses to change their practices. Fred told us a good story about 15 people going into, you can tell the story, but
Well, we had an extension specialist at Iowa State University that taught a course about 10 years ago, and she was interested in knowing how individuals can affect the food that's available in their local supermarkets. So she had her students go into various supermarkets, and these were all in Iowa, to find out how many of the students needed to go into a supermarket to ask to put a particular product on the shelf that was currently not in the shelf, on the shelf in those supermarkets. And what they found pretty consistently was that when 15 individuals went into the same supermarket and asked for the same product, that supermarket almost inevitably would get that product on the shelf. And the reason I thought that was so interesting, because at least back at that time, I was always told that, if you're a company and you want to get a new product on the shelf, you got to buy shelf space, so you're looking at, $50,000 investment. You don't need $50,000. You just need 15 people going to the same supermarket in the same week, and that product will end up on the shelf. So, and the reason I think that we have so much power as individuals in this, as food customers, is because people who are in the food business know that it's important for them to keep their customers, because if I'm in a business of manufacturing computers, for example, and if I lose a customer, I can always get my existing customers to upgrade their computers more often, or to buy 2 instead of 1. In other words, it's a flexible market. But if you're in the food business and you lose a customer, you can't just get your existing customers to eat more. So it's an inflexible market, and economists talk about that as an inflexible market. So we have a lot of power as individual customers if we get organized a little bit and just get 15 people to go into a supermarket. Now maybe that's unique to Iowa, but I don't think so.
But I think that kind of the larger point is, that's one form of activism around supermarkets. It's still sort of a consumer activism, but there's lots of different forms of activism that can lead us in the direction of a better food system. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. There's some groups in the U.S. that are incredibly effective. I think the Pesticide Action Network has had, which is based all over the world, but there's one group in San Francisco that's had a tremendous effect, for instance, on the strawberry industry and the use of methyl bromide. You get 15 savvy activists and get up in the morning and say, I'm going to change this thing. You can do a lot of damage.
Or maybe a lot of good.
And it's a necessity too, because if the only politics is the politics of what we buy, then it recreates a very problem we've been talking about this bifurcated food system, where those who have the opportunity to buy their ways out and get the better stuff can, and that leaves everybody else to get the dregs. And so it's just not enough to kind of create good, positive alternatives without contesting what's wrong. For everybody to have access, or to be able to eat good, nutritious, less toxic food.
So there's one point I would like to kind of chime in on, and a whole other angle on this, which is that around the country, a very interesting phenomenon is sprouting up, which are food policy councils. County food policy councils, city food policy councils, or food policy coordinators that are appointed by mayors in cities. And this is something that 5 years ago was maybe just barely on the radar. 10 years ago, I don't think anybody was even thinking about it, although they were hoping for it. And what we're starting to see now is that cities or counties, which represent big buyers of food, I've been listening to groups of advocates for a number of years, forming policies, creating an alignment with city government officials, whether they be mayors or city council speakers or senators or legislators or borough presidents or county executives, whatever they are. And now all of a sudden food policies are cropping up in cities that are going to impact tremendously the kind of food that is produced to satisfy those markets. So for example, in New York City, the New York City Department of Education purchases $145 million of food a year. They're the second largest government buyer of food in this country. When they change a policy, which they're doing on their own, and when New York City creates some policies, which they just have, which came out of a policy platform that was put together by our city council speaker, it has the potential to shift $300 or $400 million worth of purchases to better food from what it currently is. And as soon as a big buyer like the New York City Department of Education goes to a manufacturer and says, you know what, you gotta take out those trans fats, you gotta take out that high fructose corn syrup, you gotta do this to your packaging, those companies do it because they've got a $145 million customer on the other end, and that benefits all the other smaller buyers in that same purchasing group. So big buyers, big cities are starting to create policies that are going to be a major driver in changing some of the way that food is produced in this country.
Well, that is a perfect segue to head over to another level of question.
The purple level.
Global hat.
Otherwise known as the purple level.
What's good about our food policies in the U.S., our food system? What's some of its weaknesses, and what needs to change? So I'm going to just put everybody on the hot seat now and ask everyone to sort of say what's a strength, what's a weakness, if you want to, or certainly say what needs to change, what things can we work toward changing. And who would like to lead off with that? I won't make you do it.
I'm happy to do it. This is my favorite topic, so I'm happy to do it. You know, I think when they're, and I have never been to Blacksburg before. I apologize. It's really beautiful here. I hope I get to come back. I don't know what the food climate is like here, meaning what the temperament is, what the energy is around food. But in a lot of places and a lot of groups and a lot of communities that are just starting to think about food and starting to think about what they want differently about food, they get very angry. And you get very angry and they say, the current system we have is terrible and we need to overthrow this system. And from my personal and professional perspective, I think that is the wrong approach to take. Because actually, most of us in this country have access to a lot of food fairly inexpensively. Many of us are getting not so healthy from eating some of this food, but most of us have a lot of choices. And the choices that we have were created because there were some problems that needed to be resolved in this country around food and agriculture production and food access that we solved really well. We built a rail system that transports food. It doesn't transport people very well. A great rail system that transports food all over the country. We have an interstate system that trucks can get from East Coast to West Coast, from Florida to New York. We might not like the idea that we're not buying all local food all the time, but the fact is we can get a product from California to New York in 3 days. And that's pretty good if you want to be feeding a big population center of people, if you want to be feeding a nation. So when I look at this question of what do we need to do to fix the food system, I say, what problem are we trying to fix? The system is in many ways not really broken, and there are a lot of safety nets and there are a lot of policies currently in place that we're very lucky to have, such as the food stamp policy, such as the National School Lunch Program, the emerging farm to school programs within the lunch program, Head Start, elder care. We have a lot of programs that are pretty ingrained in our national policy that get a lot of food, a lot of nutrients to a lot of people that can't. And we have a good infrastructure between roads and rail if we could only figure out how to use it better. So my perspective on that is we don't need to throw the system out. We need to reorient the system to what the demands are from consumers and what the resource constraints and what the pressures are on the environmental and energy side as we go forward into the future of food.
Somebody else want to continue? What would you change in our food system?
Well, I think that one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is how is food policy shaped today, and who influences that? And I think the answer to that currently is pretty clear, and that is that our current food policies are shaped by those food enterprises that are currently in control of our food system. And that's simply, you know, I mean, it's something we should expect. In other words, companies and farm organizations, et cetera, that have invested, and farmers themselves who have invested billions of dollars in this current food system are not going to want to see that change. You know, when I was on the National Pew Commission for Industrial Animal Agriculture a couple of years ago, and so we were invited to visit many of our major, you know, food system entities out there. And when I walked into, and one of the things, of course, we were concerned about was the industrial animal agriculture systems. And when I walked into a Tyson chicken processing plant in Arkansas, and here was this 4-story high building, you know, with millions of chickens flowing through that system, and I walked inside this building, I thought, my God, these people have invested billions of dollars. They're not going to listen to us about any kind of changes that we have in mind. And it's not that they're evil, it's because, you know, they've made this investment, they have a responsibility to their investors, you know, to return on investment, et cetera. And so they're going to support the kind of policy, the kind of public policies at USDA and with the United States Congress to maintain policies that are going to continue to support that system. And so that's what we have to expect. Now, I think that many of us are beginning to recognize that that system and those policies are broken in many ways. You know, we know that there are now about 1,000 dead zones on the planet as a result of this system. You know, and you can go through the list. You got your own list. You know, we don't need to go through it for you. So then, how do we bring about change? You know, how do we change policy? You know, because the policies support and in many ways, quote, subsidize the current system. So how do you bring about changes? Well, one of the interesting things that I'm finding now, and again, primarily because of my involvement with the Stone Barn Center, is I now have the opportunity to be in the heart of commodity agriculture in Iowa, where the efforts on the part of most people that are interested in working on public policy is to keep the current system in place. And you can see this playing out right now. You know, you've all seen the blogs on the internet, et cetera, about we're going to do the food and farm policy in 2 weeks this year.
Yeah, right.
You know, and it's not going to be open to public scrutiny or public conversation. And you know, again, that's part of because the current system has that pretty much, you know, in hold of that. But involved in the Stone Barn Center now, where I have the opportunity to engage with people in our more urban communities, and our urban communities are for the most part getting ready for change. You know, you even have people like Scott Stringer, who's the president of Manhattan Borough, who's now become a radical advocate of the food shed concept. And his deputy president tells me that he gets more phone calls and emails and letters and even people stopping him on the street to commend him for the stand that he's taking on food issues than anything else he's doing as a politician in New York.
Right.
So what I'm seeing is that what's going to evolve at some point, it's going to get very interesting, is that we're going to have these centers of human population where by the mere fact of the numbers, the number of voting population, the voting people, who are going to want to see changes in our food system, and they're going to start advocating for policy changes over against the vested interests. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be interesting to watch that play out. And I think we're going to see over the next decade, also because, you know, there are a lot of new challenges that are coming at us that even those of us who are very committed to bringing about changes could never bring about without the changes that are in fact going to come. Because our current food system is enormously energy intensive. We only get about 1 kilocalorie of food for every 10 kilocalories of energy that we invest. So as energy costs go up, it's not going to be feasible. As climate change brings us more unstable climates, because this huge monoculture agriculture that we have out there is absolutely dependent on stable climates. So that's not going to be there. We're drawing down our mineral resources, rock phosphate and potassium, for example, which is a critical resource for our current system. We're drawing down our fresh water resources all across the planet. 70% of our fresh water is now just used for agricultural irrigation. You look at all of those things, and so at some point over the next several decades, we're going to see some major, major changes take place in the food system simply because this current system cannot be sustained. And my question is, are we ready to suggest the alternative approaches? Now, there are some individual farmers all across the planet who've already made this transition. There are a lot of individual people working on it, but for the most part, we're not expending, we're expending almost zero of our public research dollars.
That's right.
Exploring these alternatives, how to scale them up, how to move into this new kind of future that we have. There's enormous opportunities here for us, for all of us, and for all of us in land-grant universities. So how do we begin to bring that so that we're ready for the changes that are coming when they come? I think that's our big challenge.
I was just going to say there's an important component of that that's sort of embedded in what Fred just said, which is we have to be careful what we wish for, in a way, meaning we need to be ready for what we wish for, because there's also this incredible energy around policy now. But what happens if the policy we want goes into effect tomorrow and the marketplace and the production system isn't ready to do it? That policy will last about 30 seconds before it's destroyed. So just kind of reiterating Fred's point from another point of view, the policies are important to have, but the production system needs to be in place to accommodate them when those policies go into place.
Yeah. Well, but it's interesting. I mean, on that, it's interesting though, because producers are very responsive to regulation. When I was doing my research on organics in California, it was amazing how many farmers were experimenting with non-chemical ways of agriculture because they were worried about having their pesticides regulated away. And where there's all this, we can't regulate them because they'll go out of business. But indeed, farmers are very, sometimes those pushes do create innovation. I just want to, rightfully, there's a lot of focus on farm policy right now. And there needs to be more. And the things that most need attention in terms of farm policy are what Fred alluded to in terms of land-grant university priorities. Right now, our land-grant universities this is a huge subsidy to agriculture. The training and research that goes on in land-grant universities, it often feeds industrial agriculture. And there, as you said, about 1% of the research is going into sustainable and organic methods. Another area that's getting a lot of attention is the commodity subsidy programs that pay farmers to grow or not grow particular strategic crops, corn, soy, et cetera. And those are rightfully on the table because the subsidies go to some of the wealthiest farmers, and they encourage monocropping, and we're not subsidized, we don't give any subsidies to farmers that are growing in more sustainable methods. We have some small pieces for conservation, et cetera. So those are policies that are on the table. They come up in the Farm Bill every 5 years, and they can seriously re-incentivize how agriculture is done. But I also want to draw attention to policies that we don't think of when we think of food and agriculture, but very much affect our food and agricultural system. And I know these are politically tough ones, but I think we need to look at immigration policy and tax policy and all the other policies that go to the inequality problems we're talking about. So let's give an example on tax policy. I know that taxes are anathema right now, but if we look at the problems of, for instance, the school food program, everybody complains about the crap that people get in school food programs. Well, why did schools start serving really junky food? Why did they start having Pizza Hut contract out for their food supply as opposed to having it cooked in-house, even though the cooking in-house was marginal? Well, it's because they were starved for taxes, and so schools started looking at their cafeterias as revenue centers. So when you have a tax base that funds public schools to do what they're supposed to do, then they can serve healthier food. And so it's very hard to transform school food without thinking about revenue. Where does revenue come from? Sorry, folks, it comes from taxes. And hopefully progressive taxes that tax people who have the wealth. And then immigration policy, another, no one wants to go there. But let's face it, our cheap food system is based on the cheap labor of many, many undocumented workers. I mean, what's amazing about when you talk about food system change is food sector workers are some of the lowest paid workers in America. And actually because the food sector has gotten away with it, other sectors are are following that lead. One of the things that makes food sector workers makes food work so cheap is because we do have undocumented laborers who cannot at all fight for better wages or working conditions. So we need a border policy that doesn't punish people for doing the work that Americans apparently don't want to do.
That's the Alabama farmers.
Yeah.
Can't get workers on their farms now.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we think about a food system that's going to be more sustainable, we also need to think about how to make sure that people who work in food can actually buy the good food that we think is so great. So these are policies that are really politically charged right now, very difficult. But honestly, to get to a better food system, we need to get to a more just world. And that's why we need to look at these other kind of policies. And there's a lot of financial policies that are wrapped up in this too, but I'm not prepared to speak on that.
Sure. Again, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this from an international perspective. And I think the biggest change from what I've seen over the last couple of years is that we need a change in what we're investing in. The international funding and donor communities need to change their investment practices, and this really builds on what Julie and Fred just talked about. Africa's food output, for example, has become super narrowed on raw commodities like rice and wheat and maize, and less focused on more nutritious or indigenous foods like millet and sorghum and the vegetables that I talked about a little bit ago. And while Africans tend to get most of their calories from starchy staple crops like rice or cassava or other foods, there's been very little investment in what makes those starchy staples taste good. And I think taste is something that we've forgotten, and Karen brought it up last night. We want food to taste good. It's not just about filling people's stomachs. And I'll just give you an example. In 2002, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, or the CG system, invested about $120 million on research on cereals, and during the same time they invested just $15 million on fruit and vegetable research. So you can see sort of the gap in what's being invested in and funded in, and what ultimately ends up on people's plates. And I think one thing that's forgotten when we're talking about agricultural development is that it's the vegetables in people's diets that help provide them important micronutrients and vitamins, and again help make the foods that they're eating on a daily basis taste better. Another thing that I think needs more investment, and something that we've ignored on a really huge scale, is the problem of food waste. Anywhere from 20 to 50% of the global harvest is wasted before it reaches people's plates. And this is really so problematic when you think about all the billions of dollars that go into making sure that yields are increased or that production is improved. Just 5% of total investment for agricultural development goes into post-harvest losses. And from my perspective, and again from what I've seen on the ground, this is something that food waste is pretty easy to prevent. You can do it very cheaply and inexpensively if the right tools are in place. You know, I've seen everything from natural fiber mats that are used to dry grains that help prevent mold to more technologically advanced systems that help cowpea farmers, for example, seal their cowpeas hermetically without oxygen so that pests and mold don't infiltrate the crop. And then, you know, I think finally the thing I want to talk about is that we really, African nations African nations really need to reinvest in agriculture. Right now, there's only a handful of African nations that invest 10% or more of their national budgets into agriculture. And if we really want to make sure that people are well fed, that the famine that's occurring in the Horn of Africa right now, that doesn't happen, African governments really need to reinvest in their own farmers and their own people.
Thank you. Rachel, do you want to chime in on what needs to change?
What needs to change?
I'll let it pass.
Okay. I think we've heard a lot of
Well, I'm going to change
good
my
ideas.
hat. I'm going to change my hat one more time here. You think I'm doing this just to be cute. Actually, I'm refusing to color my hair anymore, so I want to clear it up. So, our last element that I want to touch on before I talk about next steps is
whether or not it's really possible to create a global food system that's environmentally sound, responsive to social justice, and feeds the people it needs to feed. So, Danielle, you've really looked at the international piece very thoroughly. So is it possible?
And this is a question that comes up in nearly every interview that I've ever given or every talk. You know, can organic agriculture feed the world? And I can cite a bunch of studies, including one very important one by Jules Pretty from the University of Essex in the UK, where he looked at 287 projects in 57 countries. And he found that farmers who implemented sustainable agriculture practices saw an average yield increase of nearly 80%. So and there are other studies that are out there that back that up, including those that are outlined in the International Assessment for Agricultural Science and Technology. Also, my good friend and an author in State of the World, Anna Lappé, put together a really compelling piece in Foreign Policy last year that sort of goes through how how organic can outdo conventional agriculture. And so, from my experience, I think it's better if I just tell you a story of a concrete example I saw on the ground that shows how growing populations are already feeding themselves. Last year, I had the opportunity to visit Kibera slum in Nairobi, Kenya. Kibera is believed to be the largest slum in sub-Saharan Africa. It has anywhere from 700,000 to 1 million people. And it's everything that you imagine in your head about slums. It's crowded and noisy and dirty and polluted, and it's frenetic. There's a lot going on all the time. But several thousand of the women who live in Kibera have organized themselves into what they call self-help groups. And a couple of these self-help groups are working with some NGOs. One is a French NGO called Solidarités, and the other is an NGO called Urban Harvest. And these women are working with the NGOs to find ways to grow food in very tiny spaces, whether it's they have a backyard or the roof of their house or other small spaces, alleyways. And one thing that they've developed is what they call a vertical farm. And essentially, it's a tall, empty rice or maize sack that's about as tall as me. And they fill it with soil, and then they can grow food on different levels. And so they can grow kale and spinach and eggplant and other vegetables. And they're able to consume part of what they grow, and then they sell the surplus to other folks in their community. But the interesting thing about these sacks, these vertical gardens, is that they became really an essential source of food security when riots occurred in Nairobi in 2007 and 2008. Because of strikes, no food could come into Kibera, but the women and their families who were growing this food in the vertical gardens, they didn't go hungry because they already had their very localized source of food. The other group of farmers I met in Kibera has been doing some innovative gardening on an empty lot that's adjacent to the slum. Some of these farmers have been working this land for about 20 years, and they occasionally get kicked off because they don't have tenure to the land, they don't own it. But they're usually allowed to come back on. And for years that they've been growing, like the other Kibera farmers, been growing enough food to feed themselves and their families and also have a surplus to sell. But about 3 years ago, they started what is called a seed multiplication project. And so what these farmers are doing are growing seeds in very, very small double-dug beds. They're organic seeds. They're fertilizing them with compost and animal manure. And then they're selling those seeds to rural farmers. And so unfortunately in Eastern Africa, there aren't a lot of local seed companies. The seeds that are available are often very expensive and aren't indigenous or adapted to the local climate. So these urban farmers are providing this very, very important input for rural farmers and really helping dispel the myth that one, that urban agriculture can't be profitable, and two, that it only feeds the poor and hungry in cities. It can also feed rural areas as well. And I just want to end on saying that the seed beds have been very profitable. One of the women I met in Kibera told me she's been working that area of land for 18 or 19 years, but it's only been over the last 2 years that she's been able to buy or earn enough money to be able to send her daughters to school. She was never able to do that before. And she became a landowner for the first time. This was a woman who's been living in Kibera her entire life. She's bought her own piece of land outside of Nairobi. So I think, you know, that really demonstrates to me how sustainable agriculture can be profitable while also preserving local biodiversity and improving livelihoods.
I love those sacks. How many sacks per family, per woman?
It depends. 4 or 5 usually.
Wow, and that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. We've talked about spatial dimensions here, starting with personal perspective, moving up to the community perspective, up to a global or national perspective, and finally to sort of the ecocentric perspective. There's one other dimension, and that's time. And we've touched on that with what are the next steps, or what needs to change in this food system. What I'd like to do now to sort of summarize, allow the panelists to summarize some of their thoughts, is to ask each one, what is the obvious single next step? What's the favorite next step that should happen in order to begin to transform our food system? So, Rachel, may I start on this end? So
Sure.
going a little different direction.
I mean, I guess the next step really is that we have to start thinking differently about what the possibilities are for a different sort of food system. We have to start thinking outside the box, and we have to get involved in and create alternative food systems. I think, particularly just following up from what Danielle said, when we think about kind of global agriculture in the global south, I think we have to stop thinking about it as a technological problem. A lot of the food problems are far more than technological. They have to do with access to resources, and there are plenty of local ideas and local, farmers know a lot, and there are ways in which we can support their efforts rather than the approach that I think we often take here in the U.S. and that our donor organizations and foundations take, which is we will develop the solutions and then we'll bring them and develop them, give them to you. I think that's a completely wrong-headed way of going about it. If we want to have better food systems, if we want more people to eat, we want more food security, we have to find ways to support small-scale efforts by local people who know what their needs are and can develop their own solutions to those problems. Those are really hard things to do. But I guess that's what I would suggest, that we need to stop focusing on kind of a global, a universal solution and support kind of heterogeneous solutions for heterogeneous problems, and kind of move away from this culture of expertise that we've got. I'm really talking now about this whole kind of relationship between the first world countries and the global south.
So next step, listen to the local farmers.
Yeah.
Share expertise.
Yeah, and in terms of our own system, thinking more outside the box on what the possibilities are.
Thank you. Danielle?
I would echo a lot of what Rachel just said. I think that we forget how smart farmers are, that they're not just farmers, that they're businesswomen and businessmen, that they're stewards of the land, that they're teachers in their communities, and recognizing that local and traditional or indigenous knowledge, I think, is very important, and it's something we've forgotten. And that gets back to a point I tried to make a little while ago about reorienting our investment in agriculture. I think the wrong things are being invested in, and I think a lot of people here would agree, and changing that and then listening to the folks who are actually the practitioners instead of the people in white lab coats. I think that's sort of what, whether you're talking about African agriculture or Asian agriculture or US agriculture, that's what we need to be doing.
Well, I think that almost everything that we've talked about here today ultimately begins with the soil, and we have fundamentally ignored soil as in terms of our food system for almost a century. And so I think whatever we can do in next steps to, and really on a global basis, to recognize the importance of restoring the biological health of our soil that will do more than anything else to prepare us for all the challenges that we're going to be meeting in the future and to address many of the issues around what is good food that we've talked about today. And I think in this, it's going to be important for the arts to play a critical role. And one of the things that I'm really enthusiastic about is that Deborah Garcia, who is a great filmmaker, has been spending the last 4 years developing a new documentary on soil. And I've seen enough parts of that I'm convinced that anybody that sees this documentary is not going to think about soil as dirt anymore. And I think that's going to be a major accomplishment. And the documentary is going to come out in January, so we're almost there. But I think anything that we can do in our land-grant universities, in our communities, certainly with our soil scientists, to work with everyone to create this new culture around soil. And also, you know, one of the things, again, at the Stone Barns that I'm learning, you know, we now have 10,000 children come through there a year, and they get their hands in the soil. And I can tell you, it's life transforming for those kids. And so there are a lot of things we can do that I'm very excited about, and ultimately it comes back to our connection to the soil.
So next step, don't treat soil like dirt.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, what I see a proliferation of food activism. It's just there's another organization starting every day to address food issues, and I know it well because I work with these students who want to work with food, and it's really exciting, and yet. It's very much about creating new alternatives. It's about, a lot of the work that's going on is about bringing produce into low-income areas. It's about teaching people about better nutrition. It's about getting their hands in the soil. And this is, like, I see this is what people want to do. And I notice that that's where a lot of the energy is. And actually, I'm a bit troubled by it, because I don't want to take away from those activities, but what I see is that all the activities going there and people are ignoring the policy world. And every year I work with students and I say, you know, here's an organization that's like Pesticide Action Network, that's like really working on banning the worst source of pesticides. Or here's an organization that's working on, on the Farm Bill next round to kind of change up the commodity subsidies or ensure that there's a kind of different subsidy system. And they all say that's really great, but you know what, I really just want to cook and garden. And so, because it feels very easy. And so, like, I don't want to dismiss all the lovely work that's going on getting people involved in this very grounded material way in cooking and gardening, but it's just not enough. It's really not enough, because it's producing this problem we've been alluding to all day, that we're creating a really lovely food system for some, and everybody else is part of this other one. And so unless we kind of find ways to address policies in big global ways, we're not going to get very far. And so how do you do that? Well, it's not easy. When I talk about this, people say, you're crazy, because, like, what can you do when we have a government that seems so difficult right now? But one of the first things we need to do is stop thinking that government's always the problem. The media, we were talking about this on the way from the airport, the media tells us that the government is always the problem, but never the corporations. Governments have done good things for people in the past. As Karen was alluding to, we have relatively good food assistance program because people fought for them. So we need to, can't tell you which policies today are the ones that we can most bite off. I think we need good strategic thinkers who can think of campaigns, but we have to oppose what's going bad as much as building alternatives that seem better. Because those two projects need to go to better. You need to show those alternatives to show what's possible, but you also need to oppose the things that are bad, or else all we'll have is that kind of separate food system for those who can afford it.
So now I get to be last, which is not good. But what I'll say, I mean, everything everybody said is great, and I don't actually need to add anything to it, except that, and I see a lot of young people in the audience here, and I really would want to implore you to understand that the moment we are in right now in this country for food has never been here before, and it may not be here a year from now. We are in an incredible moment where there is all of this intelligence, all of this activism, emerging policy, a huge public health issue. Even though many of these factors are problems, they are all in place and on the table, so to speak, at exactly the same moment. This moment may not come again. And I've been kind of saying that for a while, but 2 weeks ago, Sam Cass, who is the senior White House policy advisor to the First Lady and a chef, was speaking at a conference that I organized, and he said, the moment is here now and we must seize upon it. And hearing that come from somebody who works in the White House made that statement a whole lot bigger for me than it typically is. So just think about that. This is the moment that may not repeat itself in our lifetime to change our food system.
Well, first of all, let's thank our panelists for a great discussion.
Thank you.